You're not family anymore, Dad. You're just a burden. That's what my son, Matthew, told me one rainy Tuesday evening as I stood in the living room of the very house I built with my own two hands. His wife, Karen, didn't even try to hide the smirk on her face when he said it. She leaned back against the leather couch I had paid for, sipping wine like a queen, and added softly, almost like poison dripping from her lips, "Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live. Harold, you've had your run here." The words sliced deeper than any knife. After 67 years of living, working, sacrificing, and raising children, I never thought my own flesh and blood would cast me aside like I was nothing. I just stood there, in silence, staring at the family photos on the mantel, the ones of Matthew at Little League, of Christmas mornings with wrapping paper everywhere, of my late wife, Diane, smiling in the kitchen she loved so much. My chest ached, but I swallowed the pain. Let me introduce myself. My name is Harold Green. I was born and raised in Millbrook, Ohio, a small town with more diners than traffic lights, where folks still wave from their porches, and everybody knows your business before you do. I spent 40 years working at the steel mill outside of town, the one that shut down 5 years ago. My hands are calloused, my back crooked, but I always put family first. I bought this house in 1985 with Diane. It wasn't much back then, a fixer-upper with leaky pipes and a roof that threatened to collapse every winter, but it was ours. I worked overtime shifts, laid bricks myself, and turned it into a real home. This house saw birthday candles blown out, scraped knees bandaged, and holiday dinners with too much turkey and not enough chairs. After Diane passed from breast cancer, 10 years ago the house felt empty, but it was still filled with her memory, and for me, that was reason enough to stay. When Matthew lost his job 2 years ago, I opened my doors to him and Karen. "It's just until we get back on our feet," he told me. I believed him. After all, that's what family is for. I never charged them rent, never asked for a dime toward utilities or groceries. I figured a father's duty doesn't end when his kids are grown, but somewhere along the way, kindness turned into entitlement. Matthew started treating the place like his own. He swapped out furniture without asking, painted over Diane's favorite yellow kitchen walls with some modern gray, and even invited his buddies over every Sunday to watch football, drinking my beer and tracking mud through the house. I bit my tongue. He was my son. I thought maybe this was just his way of coping with stress. But Karen never respected me. She talked down to me, mocked my old-fashioned ways, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "Matthew, your dad's stuck in the past. He doesn't belong here anymore." Now, after months of these small humiliations, Matthew's words landed like a final blow. "You're not family anymore." I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just nodded, walked upstairs to my bedroom, and shut the door. But inside, something broke, and something else hardened. Because here's the thing, neither Matthew nor Karen understood. The house wasn't theirs. It was mine. My name was on the deed. My sweat was in its walls, and as much as they thought they could erase me, they had no idea what I still had in store. But before I continue, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The truth is, that night was the spark of something I never thought I'd have left in me. A fight. A slow, steady burn of anger, of justice, of a need to remind my own son of what family really means, and what happens when you forget. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, listening to their laughter downstairs, and I began to plan. The next morning, the air in the house felt heavier than usual, thick with the smell of burnt coffee and entitlement. Matthew was in the kitchen, loudly complaining about the coffee grinder I'd bought years ago. "This thing's ancient, Dad. Why don't we get a new one? One that actually works?" he said, glaring at me like I was some relic from the past. Karen, perched on the counter, with her laptop, looked up and smirked. "Honestly, Harold, you really should let go. We have modern tastes now." I took a deep breath and forced myself to smile. "It's the same coffee grinder Diane and I used when we were married," I said quietly, "and it still makes good coffee." Matthew rolled his eyes. "Yeah, well, good coffee doesn't matter when you're stuck in the Stone Age." I bit back the retort that rose in my throat. Years of sacrifice, late nights, overtime, fixing the roof after storms, helping. Then when they had nothing, gone. In their eyes, I was just an old man taking up space. But something inside me shifted. That night, I realized I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I needed a plan, a real, calm, calculated plan. I spent the next few days quietly, gathering information. I reviewed the house deed, confirming my name was still the sole owner. I went down to the Millbrook County Recorder's office, asked about property laws, inheritance rights, and tenants' responsibilities. I even checked with a small-town attorney I knew, Mr. Thompson, a gruff but fair man who had been handling my estate planning since Diane passed. He reminded me, "Harold, legally, that house belongs to you. They might act like it's theirs, but if you ever need to, you can reclaim it. Just stay calm and do it right." It was the reassurance I needed. I didn't want revenge for the sake of spite. I wanted justice. I wanted my dignity back. Meanwhile, Matthew and Karen continued to disrespect the house and me, inviting friends over for loud parties and leaving trash in the yard. I began documenting everything: dates, times, conversations. I even set up discreet cameras in the living room, not to spy, but to record the chaos and prove what kind of behavior they were bringing into my home. Then came the neighbor gossip. Small towns are vicious when they smell drama. Mrs. Leary, who lived across the street, leaned over her fence one afternoon and whispered, "Harold, I don't know why you put up with them. They act like they own the place already." I nodded, politely, but said nothing. I knew this was my moment to observe, to prepare. Let them think they had the upper hand. Let them continue underestimating me. And then, the first real confrontation happened. Matthew tried to evict me, literally. He stormed into my room one evening, flinging the bedroom door open. "Dad, I'm serious. You need to start packing. You've been living here for too long. Karen and we need space to live our lives." I stood up slowly, looking him straight in the eye. "Matthew, you realize I'm the owner of this house, right?" He laughed, the kind of laugh that combines disbelief and arrogance. "Don't be ridiculous. You've been living here like a guest for 10 years. You're retired, old-fashioned. It's time for a new generation." Karen appeared behind him, folding her arms. "Honestly, Harold, it's humiliating. You should just go. The house, the bills, everything. We'll handle it." I could feel the anger bubbling up, but I stayed calm. I had a plan. I had all the evidence I needed. And most importantly, I had the law and common sense on my side. I left the room and went to my desk, pulling out my laptop. I drafted emails to my attorney, to the local bank, and even to a mediator in town who handled tenant disputes. Every word was measured, every fact documented. Because what Matthew and Karen didn't understand was that this wasn't just about a house. It was about respect, dignity, and justice. And I had been patient long enough. That night, as I lay awake, I could hear them laughing again downstairs. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't hurt. I was plotting, slowly, methodically. And I knew that when the time came, they would learn exactly what happens when you treat your own father like a burden. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long stripes across the hardwood floor. I sipped my black coffee, the bitter warmth grounding me, and looked at the house that was mine, yet felt like a battlefield. Matthew and Karen were already awake, bickering over what color the living room should be repainted next. Their voices carried upstairs, sharp and careless, but I didn't flinch. I had made my decision. I would fight back, but not like a man blinded by anger. This would be a measured, precise reclaiming of what was mine. The first step was legal leverage. I called Mr. Thompson and went through every document, deeds, utility bills, insurance policies. Each one had my name on it. I also discovered something I hadn't realized. Matthew had never actually signed anything granting him rights to the house. All his assumptions were based on convenience, not law. "Harold," Mr. Thompson said, after reviewing the documents, "you have every right. If you want to, you could issue a formal notice, start eviction proceedings, and he'd have no legal leg to stand on. But remember, small-town gossip spreads fast. You can also use mediation first to make it clean and undeniable." I nodded slowly. Clean and undeniable. That was my motto from now on. Next, I set up a careful observation plan. Over the next week, I made sure to quietly document everything. Matthew and Karen were careless. They left doors unlocked, mail piled up, friends wandering in and out of the house. Every bit of reckless behavior, every insult they threw my way, I recorded. Then came the small reveals that made the neighbors whisper. I started by casually pointing out small inconsistencies in their behavior. At the Millbrook Diner, where I had breakfast every morning, I mentioned how the new generation of homeowners sometimes forget their responsibilities. Mrs. Leary's eyes widened. She always loved a little scandal. Mr. Jacobs, the banker, overheard me talking about property rights. Slowly, the word spread. Harold Green was not a man to be pushed around. Matthew didn't notice at first. He was too busy trying to redecorate. The living room with modern art he didn't even like. Karen mocked my old furniture in front of her friends, thinking she was clever. But every careless action only strengthened my case. One evening, Matthew tried another move. He came home with a lawyer, someone young and flashy from Cleveland, thinking he could intimidate me. The man handed me papers, speaking fast and condescendingly. "Mr. Green, we'd like you to sign these documents voluntarily, granting the house to my clients. It's simpler that way." I looked him straight in the eyes. "You think I don't know my rights?" I said calmly. "The house is mine. Every brick, every nail, every dollar I paid, it's mine. And you, sir, are wasting your time." He faltered, blinking, realizing his theatrics weren't working. Karen looked stunned. She had expected me to be a timid old man, easy to scare. Instead, I smiled politely and shook my head. From that day forward, the house became a chessboard, and I was 3 moves ahead. I quietly filed official notices with the county, documenting Matthew and Karen's residency as informal and acknowledging my full ownership. I contacted the local bank to review any potential mortgage or lien disputes. Every precaution, every piece of evidence was laid out. At the same time, I began planting small seeds of gossip. I let neighbors see me calmly explaining property laws, casually mentioning how some people think a house belongs to whoever moves in first, without realizing the deed says otherwise. Slowly, the perception in Millbrook was shifting. Instead of the old man being a nuisance, he became someone you did not cross. But the real turning point came one Sunday afternoon, when Matthew and Karen had friends over for a housewarming party. I walked downstairs, carrying an envelope, and set it on the dining room table. All conversation stopped. I smiled, calm as ever. "This," I said, tapping the envelope, "is a copy of the official notice I filed with the county. It confirms the house remains under my ownership. Everything else you've done here, changes, parties, improvements, have been at my expense and under my roof. You've been living here as guests, not owners." The room went silent. Even the chatter of their friends froze. Karen's face paled. Matthew's jaw clenched. They had thought they had already won, only to realize the rules had changed. And I knew one thing for certain. The moment I executed the next steps, they would feel the full weight of their arrogance. The question was just how public I wanted this revelation to be. Because when Matthew had called me a burden, he had no idea I was about to flip the script in a way that would leave the entire town talking. The morning of the confrontation, the sun rose over Millbrook like a silent witness. I brewed my coffee, the smell of roasted beans mixing with the crisp autumn air drifting through the open windows. Today wasn't about anger, it was about execution. Everything I had planned, every document, every bit of evidence would come together in front of the people who needed to see it most. The venue? The Millbrook Town Hall, where the local community often held events and where Matthew and Karen couldn't easily spin a story. I had arranged a formal meeting, presenting it as a dispute resolution for the property, and invited neighbors, the local mediator, and a few town officials who knew my family's history. Matthew and Karen arrived dressed as if they were attending a casual brunch rather than a showdown that could strip them of their assumed authority. Matthew's smug grin faltered the second he saw the room. Karen tried to mask her panic with a fake smile, but I could see it in her eyes. They were realizing they were outmatched. I began calmly. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice steady and even. "I want to clarify something about the property at 142 Maple Street. Despite assumptions made over the past few years, the deed clearly states that the property belongs solely to me, Harold Green. No other person has legal claim." I handed a copy of the deed to the mediator, who read it aloud, and then to the local banker, Mr. Jacobs, who nodded gravely. The room grew quiet as the reality settled in. Matthew's face turned red. "This is ridiculous! I've been living here, paying for utilities, making improvements." I smiled, calm and almost gentle. "Matthew, those improvements were paid for with my money. The utilities, also mine. Every dollar spent in this house was because I allowed it, not because ownership changed hands. And every insult, every disrespect, that does not change the law." Karen's composure cracked. "Harold, this isn't fair. We've made this house a home." I interrupted, my voice soft but firm. "A home is more than furniture and paint. A home is respect. And respect is something you have refused to give me for far too long." The mediator nodded, signaling Matthew and Karen that there was no room for argument. I had expected resistance, and yet, seeing them falter under scrutiny, felt satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with revenge. It was justice. Then came the mini-reveals, carefully timed to maximize impact. I had printed photos of the parties, the mess, and the property damage, all time-stamped. I showed them. To the room, spilled wine on the carpet, broken fixtures, muddy footprints tracked into the living room. "Neighbors," I said, gesturing to the crowd. "This is the behavior I've tolerated because they are my family. And now, the law confirms that no matter how loud they claim ownership, the house remains mine." A murmur ran through the audience. Mrs. Leary whispered to her friend, "I told you Harold Green wasn't someone to mess with." Matthew's voice cracked. This can't happen. We've been here for 2 years. 2 years of living under my roof. Yes. 2 years of forgetting respect. Yes. But 2 years doesn't change the legal truth, I said calmly. Karen tried one last tactic, raising her voice, hoping to shame me publicly. "You're old. You can't even manage your own life, and you think you can control ours." I leaned in slightly, my eyes steady. Old enough to know better. Old enough to plan properly. And old enough to make sure justice is served. That's exactly what I'm doing. The mediator finally spoke. "Given the deed and supporting documentation, the house legally belongs to Mr. Green. Any further claims by the residents living here must comply with his terms." Matthew's face went pale. Karen's hands trembled. They had underestimated me, underestimated the law, and underestimated the quiet patience of a man who had sacrificed everything for his family. And just when it seemed they might argue further, I dropped the final reveal, a letter from the county. Recorder confirming the eviction rights were mine, effective immediately. Matthew froze, realizing he could fight in court. But the town's perception had already turned against him. I stepped back, letting the room absorb the weight of reality. This wasn't anger. This was closure. This was reclaiming what had been, mine all along, without stooping to cruelty. As we left the town hall, whispers followed us into the parking lot. Some neighbors nodded at me with respect. Others looked at Matthew and Karen with disapproval. For the first time in months, I felt the burden lift off my shoulders, but I knew the story didn't end here. The final act, the poetic justice, the real closure was yet to come, and it would be public, undeniable, and unforgettable. The following weekend, I returned to 142 Maple Street, the house I had built, the house that had seen decades of laughter, tears, and sacrifice. The air smelled of wood polish and autumn leaves drifting through the open windows. It was quiet now, peaceful. For the first time in years, it felt truly like home again. Matthew and Karen had moved out, not quietly, but with as much drama as they could muster. They had packed their belongings, leaving behind shattered vases and the faint stench of arrogance. The neighbors whispered behind their curtains, many coming over to offer sympathy or congratulations. Mrs. Leary, as always, was first to wave, muttering, "Told you Harold Green was no fool." I walked through the house slowly, touching. The banister Diane had loved, the fireplace I had repaired countless times, the kitchen where we celebrated every birthday. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. And yet, poetic justice had one final act. I had worked quietly with Mr. Thompson and the town's small council to make the eviction public, not to shame Matthew and Karen personally, but to show the truth of entitlement versus responsibility. Local newspapers covered the story. Long time, Millbrook resident reclaims home from disrespectful family. The article didn't exaggerate. It simply laid out the facts. Matthew had been forced to find new housing immediately, losing both face and credibility. Karen's friends whispered behind her back, some even avoiding her in the grocery store. Their social standing had crumbled, because they had ignored respect and law for convenience and arrogance. Meanwhile, I reclaimed not just the house, but my dignity. I installed a new lock, rearranged a few things, and even invited a few neighbors over for a casual Sunday dinner. Laughter returned to the rooms, soft and genuine. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about life continuing with integrity, intact. Sitting on the porch that evening, watching the sunset over Millbrook, I reflected on everything. The bow sacrifices, the betrayals, the patience, and the quiet planning. I realized the true victory wasn't in humiliating Matthew and Karen. It was in remaining calm, steady, and just. I poured myself a glass of iced tea and smiled at the familiar sounds of the neighborhood. Children playing, neighbors calling. Greetings, the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Diane's memory lingered, not as a reminder of loss, but as a guiding light that had shaped every decision I made. In the end, the villains had lost more than just a home. They lost their arrogance, their false sense of entitlement, and the respect of a small town that saw through their masks. And I gained something far greater than a house: peace, pride, and dignity restored. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered softly to myself, "This is home. Always has been. Always will be." And with that, the story closed. Not with vengeance, but with justice, calm, and quiet triumph. Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.